Imagine looking at the open sea and deciding to build a province there. That is exactly what the Dutch did, where 5,000 square kilometers of saltwater once crashed against failing dikes. There are now cities, highways, and farmland. A province that did not exist a century ago. But what it took to turn seabed into solid ground and what it cost is a story few have ever heard. Salt water once pressed deep into the heart of the Netherlands. The Zuiderzee, a vast, shallow inlet, reached far inland from the North Sea, covering 5,000 square kilometers. Its brackish tides shaped the lives of everyone along its winding shores. Ports like Enkhuizen and Kampen grew rich on trade, their wharves busy with ships bound for Amsterdam and the world beyond. Small fishing villages clung to the edges, their boats chasing herring, eel, and plaice across unpredictable waters. For centuries, the sea was a source of food and fortune, a highway for commerce, a lifeline for families. But the same waters that brought wealth also brought fear. Every high tide, every winter storm threatened to breach the low dikes and sweep across the land. The wind could shift in a single night, turning calm harbors into chaos. Generations grew up with the knowledge that the sea was always waiting, just beyond the embankments, testing their resolve. Living beside the Zuiderzee meant learning to read the clouds and tides, to patch dikes and pray for mercy. It was a life balanced between hope and anxiety, where the boundary between land and water was never truly fixed. In this place, water was both road and enemy, an ever-present force shaping the rhythm of daily existence. For centuries, the Dutch shaped their lives around water, not just as a threat, but as a force to be managed, harnessed, and even transformed. Across the lowlands, generations built dikes from earth and reeds, drained marshes with windmills, and claimed patches of land from the tides. This was survival knowledge passed down in every village. How to read the sky, how to patch a breach, how to keep the sea at bay. Over time, these scattered defenses became a kind of national craft, a quiet confidence that even the wildest water could be tamed with enough will and ingenuity. But in the late 19th century, a new ambition took root. Cornelis Lely, an engineer raised among the canals and dikes, began to imagine more than simple defense. He saw the Zuiderzee not just as a menace, but as a vast opportunity. Lely's vision was bold: close off the saltwater inlet, turn it into a freshwater lake, and reclaim thousands of hectares for farms, homes, and future generations. He worked for decades, drafting technical plans and fighting for support in Parliament. Lely argued that the country's safety, food supply, and future depended on mastering the sea once and for all. The flood of 1916 made his case undeniable. When storm-driven waves tore through dikes and drowned villages, the Dutch government responded with a sweeping law, the Zuiderzee Act of 1918. For the first time, the state committed itself to a project that would not just defend the land, but remake it entirely. The dream of turning water into new ground became a national mission, one that would change the map, the economy, and the very identity of the Netherlands. The Afsluitdijk stands as a line drawn by human hands where the sea once reigned. For 5 years, from 1927 to 1932, the Dutch poured their hopes and sweat into a dam that would close the Zuiderzee forever. The plan was simple to state, but staggering to attempt. Build a wall 32 kilometers long, wide enough for a highway, strong enough to hold back the North Sea. Every day, thousands of workers rose before dawn, their boots sinking into mud and sand, their faces stung by salt wind. They drove pilings deep into the seabed, laid willow mats as a foundation, and heaved millions of cubic meters of sand and clay into place. Steam-powered cranes swung basalt boulders into the waves, one after another, until the old tides met an unyielding barrier. Temporary islands, Cornelis and Brizandijk, rose from the water, outposts for men and machines. Camps bustled with life, mess halls filled with the clatter of spoons, laughter, and tired voices. Diaries from the time speak of aching backs, cold mornings, and the pride that came with building something so vast it seemed to defy nature itself. The work was relentless. Sand barges queued in the channels, railways ferried stone, and the wind never stopped howling across the open water. Then, on May 28, 1932, at 6 in the morning, the last gap at the Vlieter was sealed. A concrete block dropped into place, and the Zuiderzee was cut off from the North Sea for the first time in living memory. Radios carried the news across the country, and crowds gathered on both shores to cheer. Where salt water had surged for centuries, a new kind of silence began. Slowly, the tides faded, river water poured in, and the great salt sea became the freshwater IJsselmeer. The transformation was not instant, but it was unstoppable. Fishers watched as herring and eel gave way to pike and perch. Birds that had followed the tides vanished, replaced by new flocks drawn to the changing wetlands. The Afsluitdijk was more than concrete and stone. It was a promise kept, a feat so bold that foreign newspapers wrote that most countries expand by conquest, and the Dutch expanded by engineering. With the sea held back, land could be claimed. The old fear of storms gave way to something new, the hope of farms, roads, and towns rising from the former seabed. The dam did not just protect the Netherlands, it changed the map, the water, and the fate of everyone who called this place home. Turning sea into land was never a simple matter of draining water. The Dutch treated each new polder as a construction project, unfolding in a careful sequence that turned the impossible into reality. First came the ring dike, a sturdy embankment built from sand, clay, and stone, encircling a chosen section of the former sea. Once the ring was closed, the real work began. Massive pumping stations, at first powered by steam and later by roaring diesel engines, labored day and night to lift millions of cubic meters of water up and over the dike, back into the IJsselmeer. As the water level dropped, the seabed emerged, muddy and raw, exposed to sun and wind for the first time in centuries. The ground had to dry and settle, a process that could take years, as the heavy clay shrank and cracked underfoot. Only then could the soil be prepared, mixed with sand and lime, coaxed into something that would support crops and roots. Roads were laid out in precise grids, canals and ditches carved to guide the ever-present water. Farms, villages, and towns followed, each one mapped onto land that had once been open water. In the east, the arrival of powerful diesel pumps in the 1950s made reclamation faster and more reliable, each machine moving nearly 1 million cubic meters of water every day. Where other nations drew borders with armies, the Dutch drew them with dikes and pumps, reshaping not just the map, but the future itself. Flevoland stands as the youngest province in the Netherlands, its official status declared in 1986. But before there were boundaries or government, there was only emptiness, a vast, silent plain where the sea had ruled for centuries. In the 1950s and the 1960s, the first settlers stepped onto land that had never seen a harvest or a house. Everything here was new. The roads, laid out in perfect lines, cut across the flat horizon with mathematical precision. Towns like Lelystad and IJsselmeer rose from blueprints, their names chosen for a future that had no past. There were no old churches, no ancient trees, no winding lanes, just open sky and the memory of water beneath their feet. For the families who arrived by train or truck, the experience was both thrilling and unsettling. Letters from early residents speak of sunrises over a landscape so flat you could see for miles, and of nights when the wind seemed to remember the waves that had once rolled above the clay. Some described the feeling of standing at their front door and realizing there was no history here, only possibility. The soil, still settling from its years underwater, needed coaxing and care. Women organized schools and markets, children played where ships once sailed, and each new home became a promise that this place could be more than an engineering triumph. It could be a real community. The transformation was not just technical, but deeply human. A blank canvas slowly filling with stories, hope, and the quiet courage of people willing to start again at the edge of the world. The price of turning sea into land was measured not only in money or effort, but in the loss of a world that had shaped generations. For fishing towns like Urk, Volendam, and Marken, the closing of the Zuiderzee was an ending as much as a beginning. Once the salt water faded, herring and eel disappeared from the nets. Families who had read the tides for centuries found themselves stranded, their boats useless in a lake where old fish no longer swam. The government offered compensation, but no fund could replace a vanished way of life. Traditional songs, dialects, and skills faded as young people left for new jobs or inland towns. The transformation also silenced the tidal flats, muddy estuaries that had fed flocks of curlews and avocets for centuries. Migratory birds lost their ancient stopover, and the rhythm of the wetlands changed forever. Most countries expand by conquest. The Dutch expanded by engineering, but every new field and road stood on the memory of water and on the lives that water once sustained. Here, where salt water once flowed from the North Sea, a living province now stands, crafted from vision, nerve, and clay. Most countries redraw borders with armies, and the Dutch used dikes and hope. The Netherlands did not just fight the sea, it looked at the waves, made a plan, and built a province where water once ruled. Subscribe for more incredible stories.